Okay, yeah, so I'm going to talk on the barriers and facilitators for reducing the sitting time with evidence from managers and workers. Some of this I'll be echoing again, so I'm going to go through it very, very quickly. We know office workers spend up to 72.5% of their day sitting, as probably most of us here can relate to when you look at the questionnaire. Obviously, we all know too well, COVID hit us in March 2020 in Ireland, and it almost led to an overnight switch from office working to remote working. To probably what we're seeing at the moment is a hybrid approach where we're combining both of them. As we went through, we know remote working increases sitting time. We would drive to our office and then maybe walk into the desk. We might meet a colleague for a coffee, all them examples that we probably went through already. When we're working from home, we don't have that. The printer's beside us, the coffee's beside us, and ultimately it increases our sitting time. As Karen would have went through, we know the health consequences now of prolonged sitting and then the implications that remote working can have unless we address it. Hence our aim as the Click to Move Consortium is support active and healthy working. So to get into it a little bit more, we essentially done two studies. One was an employee's perspective and one was a manager's perspective. I'm going to go through the employee's perspective initially and then go through managers, and then I'll show, I suppose, where they overlapped and the practical implications of it. So to go through our methods really quickly, we had three countries, namely Ireland, Spain and Netherlands, with 51 employees from a whole host of different organisations and different types of organisations. We done interviews and focus groups, all done online through Zoom. And then we done reflective thematic analysis. I know probably some of you might know what reflective thematic analysis is, so I'm going to try and explain it really, really quickly. But essentially it meant that we wanted to put structure on how we would analyse the interviews and how we could come up with our teams and our results, essentially. So what we done was we read through the we read through the text and we would have coded the transcript. So you can read the code here. Essentially what this is getting at is that when the person was working from home, they had to justify their work hours versus when they're in the office, they didn't. So I would have read that and I would have coded that as a lack of trust. So essentially I'd read it and I'm like, what does that stick out to me? And then I done all of the coding online on a software, but it came up, we had 1,000 codes and it came up on an Excel sheet. And as you can imagine, scrolling through 1,000 codes on an Excel sheet was a bit of a disaster. So I went manually and I printed out every one of the 1,000 codes and I cut out every single one of them. And at that point, I questioned why I done a PhD. But we persevered and we got through it. And I came up with some themes and sub-themes, which will probably make a little bit more sense when I present them in a second. But that's how we put structure to coming up with the results. So I'm going to go very briefly through the four teams that I came up with from the employee's perspective, and then I'll go into each of them in more detail. The first one is we can't do this without support. Essentially highlights that employees wanted a top-down approach where they got support from the organisation and their management. We're not all the same. Employees felt that most interventions currently or previously ran were one size fits all, tick the box. But as we know from large organisations, many different interests, motivations, and fitness levels. Trust us and give us freedom. There appears to be a bit of a stigma when working from home, which is creating a reluctancy to leave their desk, which automatically increases sitting time. Tell us more and show us how it gets at the need for education. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit more in a few minutes. So the first theme I'm going to go into a little bit more detail is we can't do this without support. Within this, we had three sub-themes. First one, show us you care. Essentially, employees felt that almost all or the vast majority of their sitting time was accumulated in the work environment, but yet their work employers or organizations didn't really care as to how that impacted them or if they wanted to reduce it. It was very much seen as something to do in your own time. If you wanted to exercise to try and offset the risk, we're not paying you to exercise, do that in your own time. They want to see that their employers actually care and make effort to actually reduce the sitting time. Keep us accountable and reward us. Employees felt that some of the initiatives or interventions were, I suppose, a tick the box exercise where it was like, here's some education, here's an intervention. If you do it, you do it. If you don't, you don't. They want accountability, and if they do put in an effort and reduce their sitting time and there's benefits to everybody, they want to be rewarded. And then don't leave us on your own. Obviously, when you're working from home, it's quite socially isolating. A lot of employees want interventions that include social elements to it, when reducing sitting time. So for example, walking online meetings was mentioned earlier on. It's a perfect example. And interestingly, when we look at the manager's perspectives that comes up later, it's something that also comes up. Our second theme is we're not all the same. Within this, we have two sub-themes. First one, it can't be one for all. And this simply just gets at the point that I know you mentioned 2,000, 5,000 employees or 500 employees. Within that, there's going to be many different interests. There's going to be many different interests in what they want to do in terms of physical activity, their motivations, their interest. They want autonomy over essentially what, when, and maybe how they do it, providing variation and options as to how they can reduce their sitting time versus a one-size-fits-all approach. It needs to be efficient and comprehensive. As the old saying goes, time is money, and that's particularly important in business. Any intervention needs to be short in order to get organizational support and support from managers. It can't be something that's been asked to go and run for 10 or 15 minutes. It's just not practical. It needs to be really short, it needs to be efficient, and there also needs to be some education on the health consequences of sedentary behavior, which I'm going to touch on again in a few minutes as well. So trust us and give us freedom. There seems to be a bit of stigma around remote working, and like the whole, oh, you're working from home on a Friday type thing was coming up quite a bit in the interviews. And although we might laugh at it, it creates a reluctancy to leave the desk. And many employees said that if they left the desk, they were like touching the mouse to make sure that they were seen as online and stuff. That automatically increases sitting time and reduces the opportunity to engage in physical activity. It also leads to an overcompensation as well, where we don't have a commute now, so we'll work for an hour longer. We don't have any colleagues around us, so why would we take an hour break? We'll take 20 minutes. We might drop the kids to sport, whatever, in the evening, we come back and we'll work later on. All of this is adding to increased sitting time and reduced opportunities to engage in physical activity. Second sub-theme is give us the freedom. So essentially employees want the same freedom merged in the home office as in an office. Getting up and going for a coffee with a colleague or going for a short walk isn't frowned upon in the office, but employees feel that that stigma reduces the opportunities and reduces their freedom. And then probably one that everybody experiences, loss of control over the diaries. All meetings when you're working from home are online, but if any of you use Outlook, you can type in a person's name and you can see when they're free and you can pop in a meeting, and the person that's receiving the meeting has essentially no control over it, which results often in times where they're back to back for 4 or 5 hours, which reduces their opportunity, increases sitting time. But also employees are saying that if you sit for 4 or 5 hours in meetings, there's workloads accumulating in that meetings that they have to work later on to get through, which again increases sitting time. So tell us more and show us how. Interestingly, when Karen put up the survey earlier on, if you looked at it, like back pain and a lot of physical symptoms came up quite a lot. And what employees were saying as well is that they weren't reducing, or they didn't think about reducing their sitting time until they got physical symptoms. They weren't thinking about frequency or trying to interrupt it as often as possible. It was like, my back is grand, I'll keep going, or I can see the screen, my eyes aren't fuzzy, I'm grand. It wasn't until them physical symptoms appeared that they might actually interrupt it. So it just highlights the need for education around the interruption and the frequency. Need for advice on practical ways of changing behavior long term. Employees felt that interventions worked initially for 4 or 6 weeks and then they lost interest. They want a novelty aspect to any kind of long-term behavioral change stuff. So maybe cycling between challenges. 1 month might be a step challenge, the next one might be a group or collective challenge, and then something else the 3rd month, and then you can cycle in between them so that you're keeping them interested versus here's a step challenge, do it for 6 weeks and then maybe lose interest. So now I'm going to go on to the manager's perspectives, and thankfully a lot of discussions earlier on are going to echo this, because it's quite daunting when you're standing up maybe the 3rd or 4th talk in thinking, am I going to get up and contradict everything that was said in the discussions previously? But thankfully all of the stuff that you were saying is going to come up as well. So the methods, again, the same 3 countries. We had 20 managers. We had interviews this time only, and we used Zoom. And again, reflective thematic analysis, where I questioned the whole PhD idea, but we got there. So this time we had 4, or the same, we had 4 teams. First one, we're all in this together. Again, managers highlighted that they need organizational support to really affect employees. They can't ask employees to do something that they're not able to, and they need to be able to lead by example. Give them the opportunity. When working from home, as probably everybody's experienced, there's a lack of boundaries in terms of personal versus work life. You can work longer, you can work during break. there needs to be boundaries around that if we want to reduce the sitting time. And then the one that I was afraid Kieran was going to steal my thunder on when you're talking about risk prevention to health promotion was around them ergonomic assessments and how we can leverage them now to actually educate staff and stuff. And then the last one is the invisible asset, where managers felt that an improved employee well-being through reducing their sitting time will ultimately benefit employees and the company long term. And it might be a way that we can actually get that organizational support that's been mentioned previously. We're all in this together. So within this, we had 3 sub-teams support us so we can support them. Essentially, managers want support from the organization. This was particularly important in bigger organizations where you have a number of different teams. You might be a manager of a number of different teams. As a manager, if there's guidance from the company as to how to deal with that, they have a lot more confidence to promote the initiative versus trying to do it themselves. And this will then allow them to lead by example. Managers said a number of times that they can't ask employees to do something that they're not doing themselves. So if we can give them the support, they'll be able to reduce their sitting time themselves, which in turn will hopefully give the opportunities to the employees. And again, interestingly, as I said earlier on, let's bring back socialization. Managers wanted or highlighted the need for the social aspect in remote working as well. And they highlighted that any initiatives being done in the future should really look at trying to, as much as feasible, because it is quite hard in a remote nature, as much as feasible, try and include a social element to it. Gives them the opportunities. Does anyone remember our hours, or their work hours was the first sub-team within this? Essentially, that gets at the lack of boundaries. And again, going back to that, you don't have a commute. So rather than starting at 9 after an hour commute, I'll just start at 8 o'clock, again, which is essentially an extra hour of sitting. I'll work through lunch. I might drop the kids or do whatever I do in the evening, and then I come back and work for an hour or 2. And there's essentially no limitations to when you can work. And again, it reduces the opportunities. Losing control of schedules. I would have touched on this a few minutes ago in terms of people are just popping in meetings. You essentially have very little control. Very rarely do you see people decline meetings. They'll just accept them, but that might be 4, 5, 6 hours back to back. And again, you're reducing their opportunity, and then that workload has to be done at some stage that's accumulating during the meetings. To just become immersed in work. This is either a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. From a productivity perspective, it's probably good. And I think that's something that probably most people appreciate themselves. And when you work from home, you get a lot more done usually because you don't have the distractions of people asking you to go for coffee or chatting or whatever. But from a sedentary behavior perspective, people almost become tunnel vision like with their work, and they could spend 3 or 4 hours immersed in it and don't even consider the sedentary behaviors or the physical activity or lack thereof. And this is obviously problematic. So this is one that came up obviously earlier on. From risk prevention to health promotion, we were in survival mode as the first sub-team. And essentially what all managers were saying was that COVID-19 hit us almost overnight. Nobody seen it coming. Most companies were concerned about their financial well-being, essentially, rather than anything else. They were making sure some organizations within the interviews had to get financial assistance from governments. The last thing they were thinking about was the physical activity levels of their employees. Again, something that, Alan, you touched on earlier on in terms of like the ergonomic assessments and stuff. We needed to meet standards. The almost overnight change of environments from office to remote working meant that employers wanted to make sure that there was ergonomic assessments, that there was chairs and everything was provided to make sure that the environment that employees were working in was safe. And this was a priority over physical activity of their employees. However, they do feel that now is the time, and leveraging some of them things that we were saying in terms of if you're going out to meet Siobhan, when you're going out to meet your colleagues, if you can actually mention this or have a way of educating them on the benefits of reducing their sedentary time or sitting time as often as possible, we can leverage them assessments now versus having to try and go and start maybe a whole new thing. We can leverage some of the stuff that was put in place during COVID-19. And lastly, the invisible asset. What about profit? Ultimately, business comes down to the bottom line. And this is the number one thing that came up about managers. If I'm asking my employees to reduce their sitting time, is that going to have an impact on productivity? If it is, that's going to look bad on me. And I'm telling John to do X, Y, or Z when the profit is dropping. So I suppose providing reassurance and providing education on the impact that reducing sitting time can have is a way of overcoming that. Almost paradoxically, managers want to help. they have a genuine eagerness when they become aware of the implications. They have a genuine eagerness to help and try and improve the well-being of their employees. And they felt that it's in the company's best interest. Working from home means that big organizations can essentially hire from anywhere in the world. With that comes an increased competition for that talent. There's certain big companies in Ireland and in Europe that are almost famous for their well-being programs. That can provide a competitive advantage when looking to hire people, and ultimately it can improve the performance of the employees long-term as well, which is benefiting both parties. So the bigger picture, so I'm just going to present both what came up exclusively for employees and managers, and then what came up, I suppose, is common between them. Employees alone, the big thing is education, that educational piece, that sitting time or prolonged sitting time goes beyond a sore back or sore neck, and it can have real meaningful and impactful implications for health. Support, this was across the board. Managers need support and confidence to promote initiatives and interventions and lead by example. And our employees need support to be told, look, it's okay to get up and go for a minute or 2 minute walk or do whatever. You're not going to be looked upon frowningly or negatively when working from home. Big one is opportunity, and actually giving employees and managers the opportunity to, in terms of putting boundaries on working from home, maybe incorporating walking online meetings, and just changing the culture around engaging in physical activity. And then from a manager's perspective, the big one is prioritization, essentially. We're now in a position where the financial worries of COVID-19 and the impacts of COVID-19 isn't an issue. And we have a good bit of infrastructure in terms of ergonomic assessments and meeting colleagues that we can use to educate them and make them aware of some of these. Last one is awareness. So just making both the organization aware that this isn't going to have a negative impact. If anything, it could have a positive impact. That'll get that organizational buy-in that allows both employees and managers to engage. And the big thing is that this highlights the need for a multi-component intervention, and it's probably been mentioned several times, but you can see here there's a wide variation in what's needed, and that single component intervention is probably not going to be effective. So what does this look like practically? Top-down approach. Managers can't do it on their own. Employees can't do it on their own. It has to come down from the organization. Autonomy. Employees want and managers want to be able to do the exercise that they want to do when they want to do it, and it needs to be short and efficient. Freedom. We need to break the stigma around working from home and making sure that employees know that it's okay to go and get a glass of water or go for a 1 or 2 minute walk. Again, it doesn't have to be a 20-minute run. And then lastly is that education piece. It's probably a big one in terms of making employees aware that this goes beyond a sore neck, a sore back or fuzzy eyes, that it can actually have quite severe health complications long term. And I suppose ultimately with all of this, our aim for Click to Move is have everybody up and running in no time. Any questions?